So, right, I guess that's a good idea. So it starts with this miserable breakup for her anyway. She's depressed. She holds up, joins a dating site, whatever, it doesn't work out. I think, again, like a kind of string of like miserable dates or whatever, that kind of thing, like when I was on Tinder. And just that kind of thing. It obviously, like, not playing into that too much because it is like a comedy drama as opposed to like...
Why does it have to be a comedy drama for you? Why isn't it a comedy? Why isn't it Seinfeld?
Because I feel like in Seinfeld, even though the character's like, you know, neurotic, etc., there's no... For me, I want to like get into exploring like the mental health aspect of it. And obviously, you know, and just show, I guess, some of the realities of being really anxious and really depressed.
This is a podcast for Kel. That was Kel, aged 22, in 2017. She'd come around to work on an idea that she'd had for a sitcom. I work as a director, and I often work with writers developing their ideas. The main character in Kelly's story was anxious, depressed, unreasonable, and so obsessed with her relationship that she couldn't function. As far as she was concerned, the character was a direct lift of her life. It was her. I never listened to this recording until well over a year after Kelly died. But the conversation that we had that evening, working out stories and the background to her character, is incredibly revealing of the pressures and struggles that she felt she was under less than a year before she died. That conversation, however, happened in June 2017, nearly a year after she'd graduated from the Cordon Bleu. In the intervening 10 months, her life had undergone big changes.
Like, especially after she died and when during the court case, I was like, wow, 2016 was really monumental.
Fucking, she should never have moved out.
She
should never have moved out. 2016 was a huge year for Kel, not the least of which was because I had married someone who'd come to live in our house along with our children, our natural child and her son from a previous relationship. And by the end of 2016, Kelly had to move out. The problem, in a nutshell, was that my new wife didn't accept that my relationship with Kel was legitimate, was a genuine family thing. And she tried to make it seem inappropriate and unhealthy, like it was an affair I was having. And you've got to think, in light of the fact that the same kind of allegations were thrown about by Kelly's mother. I mean, you know, you might ask, what are the chances of that? What's the bad luck of lightning striking twice like that in the same place? But the fact is that lightning hasn't just struck twice on this question from people. It strikes a lot. Apart from my wife, nobody who was actually in mine and Kel's life who knew us ever thought there was anything strange about it. But over the years, quite a few people I've found out have, from a bit of a distance, have seen the situation with suspicion and have thought that I had moved in Kel, like in a Woody Allen, Soon-Yi sort of way. I think some people have difficulty intrinsically accepting the idea that an old white man can have non-sexual feelings for a young black girl. Of course, you might say, well, hang on, perhaps the reason that lightning does strike in this spot so often is that people are seeing something inappropriate about your relationship. The problem is that nobody can actually come up with anything. Nobody can identify anything they've seen that made them feel uncomfortable. The one exception to that is an absolutely shocking statement that was written by my ex-wife, who was divorcing me at the time, in support of Kelly's mother's claim during the 2018 probate trial. I don't want to get into the details of it, but it was quite mind-boggling, and I and various others responded to it in our second statement. Following that, my ex-wife's statement was withdrawn from the 2018 trial, and so she never came to court to be questioned about it. However, a very watered-down version of her allegations appeared in my divorce trial, where my wife was available to be asked questions about what she'd written. There, when the judge asked her what specifically she'd seen in mine and Kel's relationship that was inappropriate, the most that she could come up with was that I had sometimes let Kel walk around the house in tight shorts. That was it. The final judgment said the court hadn't seen any evidence of inappropriate behaviour. It referred to Kel and me as stepfather and stepdaughter and said that my wife appeared to have been jealous.
couldn't believe her luck with that woman in 2016. I couldn't. I was just like, this girl just can't fucking catch a break.
This is Ramina.
She can't mind her own business. She can't be part of the family. Can't look at John. She can't fucking... Imagine that. Imagine going through all of that shit with your mum. All of that fucking mess. Alright? She just didn't fucking need that. And that woman was unreasonable as fuck. I remember in the period of a fucking year, okay? It literally went from... She doesn't want me anywhere near the kids. I can't do anything right downstairs, so I have to stay upstairs. To apparently I'm not participating in the family. And I'm just like,
right.
You've clearly tried. But you know, she's explained the situation with you, and I'm like, this can't be simple for John. John's dug a hole.
Yeah.
I'm just like, John can't turn around now and undo it. Yeah, John's balls deep.
The statement that Ramina made in the last episode about how the people who often do well for you and support you are often the ones that you just don't click with, that you don't spark with. That doesn't just apply to Kel, that applies to me too. I have a very chaotic pattern in my relationships, and I've often ended up treating the people who love me with indifference, and I've ended up staying with the ones who didn't. I bring my own issues to that kind of thing, and it's not that I don't discuss those things in life. I do, and I, in fact, discuss them with Kel, and I talk about it in shows as well. But to carry on talking about that here makes it about me, when the real point is, however it came about, my emotional recklessness in my private life impacted on Kel and her living situation. I also have children with my ex-wife, and I have to raise them. And I don't want to get into details of things that happened, because ultimately it's my fault. I allowed someone into my life and Kel's life who I shouldn't have done. And I compounded the problem by managing it between Kel and my ex-wife really atrociously. They both of them had the right to expect me to be a much better bridge between them. The best way of knowing how Kelly was feeling is to read the words that she wrote to me a year later in the "My Dearest Father Who Aren't in Heaven" mail. She opened that mail by remembering how things had been for us at the end of 2016. This time last year, I moved out of your house on the most awful terms, quite unsure whether or not I'd get over the feelings of betrayal and hurt, along with the impact of all the stress and depression with living with, and then she mentions the name of my ex-wife. However, you quickly recognised what could happen and made sure to stay in touch and be there for me when I needed to talk. I really appreciate that you didn't let this relationship die off, which would have been the easiest thing for you given the circumstances. It's a shame that I don't see you as often, and I miss waking up every day and seeing you typing away at your laptop, and now I miss waking up to Jack and Ethan, even when they're fucking screaming at 7 a.m. A year ago, I felt like I was being pushed away by you and that I was something disposable. Because, and she says the name of my ex-wife, and your father have pointed out numerous times people do have strange, base ideas about their real family. And now this woman came along and gave you a real family. And suddenly you were turning on me, not defending me, not believing me, and seemingly despising me. This made me sound like a jealous 3-year-old whose parents just had a new child, but in many ways, I acted like a jealous 3-year-old. Not really regarding Jack, who I've always loved, but perhaps your relationship to him, and definitely your new allegiance to, which seemed to mean that I was suddenly cast as an outsider who was allowed to observe and occasionally be a guest to your new nuclear family, even before willingly taking on that role. I'm not going to defend myself against that, because that's how Kel saw it. This might be the single biggest regret I've got. It's so hard to say, because I have about 4 that I think if I'd acted differently, I could have saved her. But this is one of them. The fact that I allowed this to happen. I didn't want her to go. And she went, and it was my fault. And even though other things came into her life shortly afterwards, the fact is that it wasn't long after moving out of here that Kel started to deteriorate. And I've thought more than once that if she'd carried on living here, if I'd been a bit more responsible and tougher on myself, and protected her at the right time, she would be alive. There was a small but real ouch moment in the conversation that I had with Romina, where she calls me out for not paying enough attention to Kel in 2016. I'd made the point that in other ways Kel hadn't exactly been blameless in the conflict with my ex-wife, which was true. Kelly could have quite a temper herself, and she'd been very unreasonable at times.
She realised you had some common ground, and she was willing to make the family work, literally for your happiness.
But it took her a while.
Yeah, it did.
And
she was hoping you'd just listen to her, I guess.
But she needed, yeah.
I guess you wouldn't, so she had to,
Yeah.
Again, it was fine. Chaos was fine for a good relationship. She allowed the chaos for her relationship with you. She did. It was fine for her. She put up with it's fine. But the just wasn't having it. And her mental health just didn't fucking need that. Her mental health didn't need replicating everything her mum spent donkey years doing. And then James was there, and I'm like a massive skeptic. So I'm like letting James play the hero, despite the fact I'm absolutely terrified. I'm like, who is this strange man?
But their relationship was not so advanced at that point. That was in...
No, but when she had to move out, she had to depend on him.
Yes.
And so he's like playing the hero.
The James that Romina was referring to wasn't the young man that Kel had met in sixth form college in 2012. Although that James and Kel would later become good friends, their relationship hadn't survived his discovery that Kel had been escorting back in the spring of 2015. Kelly's relationship with this new James, James II as she'd call him, over 30 years older than her and seriously wealthy, would be her last. It was another complex, deep, on-off, passionate affair, but it would take a hold of her, and she eventually became obsessed with James II. And it was following their final breakup in March 2018 that she put herself into a mental health clinic, where 3 weeks later she took her life. So what happened? And did Kelly kill herself over James II? James II's role in all of this is one of the most controversial if you listen to the gossip. The multimillionaire ex-Tory donor, over 30 years Kel's senior, was all ripe for speculation in this case, fueled by Kelly's mother, and a consensus settled that Kelly had either been his sugar baby or that he had been a client of hers and they had met whilst she'd been escorting. Certainly the latter doesn't appear to have been true from what Kel had said. Kelly had stopped escorting at the beginning of the previous autumn, saying that she couldn't tolerate the work, and I've got no reason to disbelieve that. What Kelly said is that she'd recently joined a dating agency, and I think it was called either Elite Singles or something like that. It had elite in the title, and it was all about, connecting successful people. And she told me around that time, I think around the time she graduated the Cordon Bleu, that she'd set her age filters for potential partners as high as 45.
I just kind of felt she was looking for that kind of stability.
This is Kel's friend Ollie.
Obviously, it is weird. It is a bit different, but I feel like Kelly. Well, maybe more so towards the end, she seemed to be interested in like older guys. But I don't at all mean the end as in like mental health oriented. I feel like maybe more so when she came back and when she passed that, was it cooking degree she did. And I feel like maybe her head was more so screwed on the fact that what she wanted was that successful man that could support them, etc. And that obviously most times out of 10 that's going to be an older guy.
Kel first started mentioning James II in the spring of 2016 while she was studying at Cordon Bleu, but still living here. She said that James was interested in her, but she wasn't sleeping with him. There was a big age gap. She wasn't sure how she felt, but he'd become a friend and he was concerned about her welfare in their house. He saw how unhappy Kelly was living here in the toxic atmosphere, and he'd offered to cover her rent if she moved out. She accepted. Kel moved into a flat in Westbourne Park in November 2016. Instantly, she said she felt relieved to be in a house where she could relax and not be on alert all the time. By the time she moved out of here, I think Kel and James were already a couple. Their relationship had definitely been platonic for the first few months, and she'd gone away with him on trips as his travelling companion. According to her, she'd insisted on separate bedrooms.
There was a feeling that I got from her that she was kind of in it for doing stuff and having trips, and then she kind of fell for him and they started having sex and that sort of thing.
This is Lisa, who Kelly met at the Cordon Bleu.
I don't think maybe he initially intended to have such an intense relationship with her in the beginning, but I got the impression that that changed.
But in the early days of their relationship, Kel didn't share any pictures of James, and it took her a while before she would admit quite how much older than her he was.
I remember when she said, she was like, oh yeah, like I showed my, because I kept being like, when am I going to meet him? Like she was like, never.
This is Tobiana, also from the Cordon Bleu.
And then she was like, it was a really big deal because I showed my dad a picture of him, and she said that your comment was, he's cute.
First, for ages, she was just seeing this guy, and then it was like, you know, he's quite well on.
Quite well off.
Yeah, well. And then as it developed, I found out what his age was, and it was like, well, what do you think about that? Because he was older than me. And I was like, well, it really depends on the quality of relationship you've got. It depends on who the two of you are.
But she also, I don't know, she always told me that he was in his early 40s. And then when I saw a picture, I was like,
Kel went down to visit Grandma Della in Barbados at the beginning of 2017. Aunt Rachel and Cousin Logan were there too, as you can see in these photos. At that point, she'd been seeing James for a few months, and she tentatively raised the subject with her grandma.
When she came down to Barbados to see me, she asked me what I thought about two people going out together, and one is a lot older. And I guess she was hinting at something. I said to her, that really doesn't bother me. And then I said to her, my husband was 24 years older than I was.
The first time I met him, I was surprised. I was surprised by how lovely he was. I was surprised by his very obvious and very genuine love for her.
James II lived abroad but visited London often. But when he wasn't in London, Kelly and James would meet each other at one of his homes or at locations around the world where he'd either be on business or where they'd go on breaks. Kel's Instagram feed from this period on shows a young woman having fun living a glamorous international life. The backdrop against which the relationship was set certainly fulfilled the part of her that wanted to be in nice surroundings, but her engagement with James II ran deeper.
I think a big part of it, and I don't mean to say this in a bad way because she wasn't shallow.
Lisa again.
But she loved the adventure that he could offer. And that was a big thing. But she also loved that he loved his kids. She loved how smart he was and how much he cared about her. She said that she could talk to him and she could talk to him about any topic and he would have information that could change her perspective on things because he was so smart.
Romina.
When they first got together, I made jokes. I was like, what the fuck is this all about? You got fucking sugar daddy? Is that what you're telling me, babes? Like, no, we're actually a couple, and she's telling me how they've got so much in common now. They really get along. I'm like, this is weird, but okay, you know. I fully understood because she was so, you know, she was really unusual with her old soul. She didn't like everything I liked. But then she also had this refined taste that I assumed I'd develop in another 20 years. For some reason, she already had it. And I made fun of her about being an old soul. And she was like, oh my God, I'm so glad James has never said that. And I was just like, well, yeah, because you like that boring crap together, don't you? Like, it's the stuff that I find boring, you know, the opera and these, you know, vineyards and whatever. I'm like, whatever. You know, she'd come in my bar, she's like fucking 21. She's like, how much is Sunset?
But she was already wet. Hang on, yeah. But
I'm like, girl, you got your whole life to drink Sunset. Here's a glass of rum.
But she was, you know, she was always into vineyards and opera and
yeah, she was classy as fuck. She was so elegant. That was her taste from,
you know, a young age.
She was into that beautifully elegant. Yeah. I was always just messing with her. And I was fine with that. I thought it was funny. I thought it would probably age her mentally. And I thought she probably sometimes gets a bit bored of being in our generation. It's probably all right for her to have his company. But those aren't the reasons I hate him. I don't hate him for getting along with her. I don't even hate him for being ill-equipped. I hate him for being inconsiderate a lot, not putting enough importance on it, even if it meant handing it over to someone else.
As you can see, James II inspires very different reactions from Kel's friends. Those of them who met him while she was alive and saw them both together liked what they saw and liked him. Romina, who didn't, has a very different view. In the meantime, on December the 17th, 2016, I received a text from Kel at 1 p.m. It was about a month after she'd moved away from home. The text said, "I need my dad." So I went straight over to Westbourne Park. This would have been about 6 weeks after Kelly had moved out of Petherton Road, and we had quickly made up, and I worked very hard to keep in close contact. I was very unsatisfied she'd gone. I felt very guilty about having allowed it, and I desperately didn't want to lose my relationship with her. I'm pleased to remember several grovelling apologies to her, and Kel was in no doubt that as soon as my wife moved out, she would be able to live with me again, and I'd never allow what happened to happen again. But on the 17th of December, Kel said she was in trouble and she couldn't go to work, and she wanted to admit herself to hospital. She was experiencing acute panic attacks, and I spoke to her employers on the phone and sat with her for a bit, and her mood improved considerably. Often she struggled with being alone as much as anything else. Still, she wanted to be admitted somewhere, so we sat in A&E for a few hours that night to see if they would take her. But I thought that was a mistake, because even though she was low, she didn't seem so bad that she needed psychiatric intervention. The hospital didn't take her in, and we returned back to Kel's. She was still shaky and she wanted me to stay over. She didn't have to ask. But in light of what happened next, I'll state the obvious. I slept on the sofa, because I woke up the next morning to a series of texts from my wife, who I'd kept informed throughout the whole weekend. And my wife said that she was taking the kids and divorcing me because I'd stayed the night at another woman's house. We didn't divorce over this. The end of my marriage wouldn't come for a few months yet, but it was another example of my wife's refusal to accept my relationship with Kel. But this was a very important moment in my understanding of the new vulnerabilities that Kel was displaying since moving away from home. The next 2 or 3 months would be a rocky period for her, as she found herself increasingly confronting anxieties and limitations. She and I would see each other as much as possible, but often it's because she'd call me and ask me to come over because she felt low and alone. When I got there, though, every time she would appear settled and calm, and she'd perk up a bit. Sometimes she apologised for that, but I obviously didn't mind because I wanted to be useful and I loved seeing her anyway. Her relationship with James II was building, from what I heard. There was a lot of communication between them. They would have very long phone calls. And from her account of it, he sounded patient and tolerant. Meanwhile, she was trying to pick herself up, and she was working here and there as a private chef on sort of one-off jobs. And she was thinking of launching her own catering business and set up a website. And she also started an open university degree. But all of these plans would just keep stuttering to a halt as she faced problems in her relationship or was overcome with anxiety attacks that would send her running to her bed. It was a very debilitating, exhausting time for her. Just as it had been with James I, within months of starting a serious relationship, her life started to fall apart. Separately, James II was also somewhat ambivalent. While he appeared to be very involved with her, nevertheless, at 30 years older, he already had his own complicated backstory and supported 2 families.
She came to me and she was just like, he doesn't want to get married again. And I turned on and was like, you do. And she just kind of brushed it off in a way that, to suggest that I'll convince him because he can be convinced. I thought that he might be flexible on the idea in the beginning. I thought he might be open to the possibility. Do you get what I mean? He's old and he's settled. He can switch his life probably around fairly easily if he wants to, but he has to make the solid decision. Okay, so their relationship was open, and their relationship would have rules. All right? don't ask me what that means. I don't know. You're not allowed to sleep with people like your exes or like
Yes, right.
colleagues or whatever. Like
Yes, I remember.
weird ass rules like this. I'm like, you agreed to an open relationship. Okay, I
Right.
can see why. All right, you live far apart. This is not, this is not going to be sexually satisfying for anyone. So, fine. But then there are these weird rules about how you can't sleep with people you might have an emotional attachment to. And I'm like, okay. She kind of, to some extent, she doesn't have a choice. Because ideally, you're not thinking about it. Ideally, she'd live with him and
Sure.
create a life with him. So this is all, for shallow sexual pleasure. This is not the ideal. But the only person in this situation which can accommodate this all happening is him. So to some extent, she doesn't have a choice. But she agrees with these rules because she's like, yeah, fine, I don't want you falling in love with anyone else. I don't think he ever really understood how deeply emotionally invested she was.
I think emotionally this is true. Kelly sought security and love, and she wanted to settle with James II. But I think this also underestimates an aspect of Kel that really comes across when you read, for example, her WhatsApps with Romina. I get that Romina's arguing that Kelly was perhaps trying to convince herself of something in a long-distance relationship that wasn't really ideal for her. But Kelly doesn't seem to suggest to me that even if James and she lived together and were settled, that she wouldn't still want to have an open relationship. It's very easy, given the serious tone of this project, to lose sight of Kelly's fun and liveliness.
Things are taking like the natural course of action, right? And then, but it's every time I try to touch it, right? He flips out. He's like, he doesn't flip out. He just goes, oh, do you mind if we just like take a little pause, take a break? I want to take it slow. And at this point, I'm thinking, this is not the real reason why, right? And this fucking, and then I had to go to bed hungry and like unhorny and upset.
You really get a feel, actually, from her correspondence with Romina, how she philosophized love, sex, being with an older man, etc. But it seems to me she's also seeking her own definition, the way of living that's honest. Kel seemed to be quite a sexually driven person, whether that was a strong, healthy drive or it was a response to other emotions or lack of emotions that she felt. That I don't know. But it seemed to me that her response to it was to try and find ways to live that made sense of her feelings. I think she was trying to be authentic. I mean, look, you might well argue they shouldn't have been having a relationship at all with that age gap, with all the discrepancies between them. That's fine. And it's very easy to think of him as being distant and that Kelly was just his plaything and something that he didn't take seriously. But whether he was ambivalent or inconsiderate at times, there's no question that she got to him. I don't get any sense in their open relationship that he was doing anything that she wasn't. And actually, he seems to have been very attentive. I also think that if Kelly were listening to this conversation right now, I think she'd firstly be mortified that we were having it in public. But I think that she would also want to defend James II. She appreciated and spoke lovingly about his patience and his support of her. And by her own account, she found herself often acting in ways that tested it. I only met James II after Kelly died, but he told me that it had been a serious relationship, that he had loved her very much, and everything that he said tallied with what Kelly had said about him. My understanding of that relationship was that he hovered around making a serious, i.e. engagement kind of commitment to her. And he did at one point, and then it fell apart. I've asked James II to come on here and talk about their relationship, and he said no. He also separately has been accused by Kelly's mother of some, really heinous stuff, as bad as the stuff that I'm accused of. And he doesn't want to give her ammo, which makes me annoyed because, honestly, Kelly's mother has got absolutely everybody on the run with her threats, even bloody multimillionaires. It's ridiculous. The evidence that I've seen her publish online that supposedly proves that he's this shockingly racist sexual degenerate. I don't know. To me, it looks completely made up. The other objection that he has to this is the focus of it. He wants Kelly to be remembered as the bright, vivacious, witty woman that she was, and for her loves and achievements and the gifts that she gave us, for that to be what's celebrated about her. I celebrate that too, but I think just as importantly, Kelly's truth needs to prevail. And I think that if there's any meaning in her life, we have to admit that she was troubled to the point where she felt she couldn't go on. Why did that happen? Could she have lived? Is there anything in all of this that might be useful for other people who might find themselves in Kel's situation? So on we go, sadly without James II. Despite the fact that Kel ended their relationship at least twice, Romina feels that even though they were both quite evenly matched as characters, his age and material stability inevitably defined where the relationship could go.
You see, it's a bigger commitment for him, but once he makes it, it's easier for him to execute in a way because he's older and he's settled. So when they first got together, I thought it was very possible that, he might come round, but there's just, he's got several things to think about where you're just like, yeah, I've got a new boyfriend, I love him. Do you know what I mean? He lives in a different country, he, whatever. He's got those children, he's got it, whatever. So he might come round, but he's got a lot of thinking to do. And then they broke up, and she was really miserable. And she said they broke up because he was set on the idea. Now, when she said this to me, I took that as a final answer from him. I really did. I took that as it's been going on. You've probably spoken about this a lot.
And we're talking now October 17, 2017, right? We're talking just over a year ago.
Even earlier than that. They'd been talking about.
Oh yeah, well they've been off. They've been off a couple of times. In fact, they had been off at the end of May into June because she came round here and she wanted to write a sitcom about it.
So I was thinking anyway. Obviously, there's going to be it doesn't really have to be more dramatic than my actual life. I don't know, because then we go into melodrama. But then
she and James II had been broken up for nearly a month, and Kel had spent the whole period deep in depression, more or less shut away in her apartment, leaving only to go on bad Tinder dates. But she wanted to do something with her experience. She wanted to write a sitcom or a comedy drama about a young woman suffering with depression. As you'll hear, Kel identifies completely with the main character of the story, directly drawing on her own experiences and feelings. The scenario and the backstory that she builds for the character are a mixture of real events and some slightly imagined elements. But even the made-up bits are clearly an expression of how she saw her life and her relationships.
But then,
do you have a title?
No, it was something shitty, like Identity, but that's not really a title. It's like the working title.
Well, what's her problem?
She doesn't have a real problem. This is exactly what it is. If I put her as growing, you lose the idea of it. I think. I've had a lot of time I've been at home a lot, a lot of time to think about it. If you put her in a situation where she's she has to look after her kid sister with cancer or something, it's really obvious why that person is depressed. That's a depressing situation. If you put her in a situation where she has no real complaints, or what somebody would say are real complaints, rather than a frivolous, whatever, people see it as quite an indulgent thing, just being depressed.
Yeah. What are you trying to say by saying she doesn't have real problems? I would say, what is it that you're interested in talking about? What's the level of problems? I'm interested in the level of problems that are purely mental. I want a few scenes where she would just E.g., what's the problem she's got and how does it?
She's just depressed. She suffers from depression and anxiety. That is it.
How does that make her act? What does she do?
She flips out in situations where people wouldn't flip out usually.
Like what?
She's unable to cope. For example, most people when they have a breakup, they they just like, they're sad and they move on, they get on with their life. They don't spend like the better part of like a month living at home in their own filth.
So how is she in the relationship? Is she also depressive? What's the craziness?
Or
what does she do?
Or she/I. Just she. But she's crazy in it. She gets upset for no reason.
In what situation?
In arguments. Every argument is completely blown out of proportion. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a time I acted crazy, and it's hard to narrow it down to just one.
Yeah, it doesn't
matter. No, I'm kidding. I'm trying to think of one. Okay, here's one. James, actually, the second, and I were in a weird place. Here's how it will start. She's with this guy that she's seeing, right? And it's like quite serious, but it's not yet defined. And so they're like in the middle of like these sort of conversations about the relationship and I guess their expectations from a relationship with each other. But then, she has a bad day and they're at a restaurant and I can't remember what happened. I can't remember exactly what was said, but whatever. She says something a bit silly to the waiter, and he says to her, "You'll have to excuse my friend." She goes dead stony, silent in the middle of the dinner, and then refuses to get in the cab with him on the way back and walks back. And then they have, just a big argument about it. And,
Because why? Because she feels...
Insecure about the status of their relationship, right? I guess it's sort of like a reminder of that the relationship is not,
Because he said friend.
Yeah, he got in the cab. I met him there afterwards and we ended up having a big argument about it.
And what happens as a result of that argument?
There was no real argument. He's just Mr. Reasonable about everything. And it's fucking infuriating. I think what made me laugh though is one time I think we had a discussion, but like more than anything, we didn't have an argument. We had a discussion and I want the sort of climax of the argument to be there, like she's screaming and shouting and he's just telling her to calm down and relax and asking her, what are the issues or whatever. And then she just goes, just stop being reasonable, stop being rational, stop trying to fix it. And he was like, well, how do you propose that we resolve this argument? And she just goes, I know I'm being fucking crazy. I just want you to apologize. I don't want you to be reasonable.
Why does she need that as a character?
Because there's no reason. That's just what I'm like. There's no real reason for it. I just get heated and upset, and I just want him to apologize.
Certain things trigger why? Because you feel what? You feel in the wilderness, you feel abandoned, you feel what?
I don't know. If I knew, I wouldn't be in therapy. This is where that's taken from, is I was being rude about that bitch that James was sleeping with. And I can't remember, I was insulting her and it's like, I'm sure she's like a nice person, you're just judging her off. And I said, why are you doing this? I'm upset. Like, why don't you just agree with me? Just agree with me. I'm mad and I just want you to agree with me. I just feel like being a bitch. I'm upset. This time I'm blowing off steam. You're ruining it.
Why is she
by getting in the way. I don't know.
What's funny about it? Why do you want to tell
this is a comedy? Because it is ridiculous and I know that it's ridiculous.
So it's about a character who behaves in...
Just irrational. I don't know how to make that funny though. But I think it would be actually funnier in a situation where it's not like a big heated argument between a couple though.
What I found funny in what you said is that the bloke is really reasonable.
I do think it's quite funny though to have like just this person who's just, they've done nothing wrong. It's like a one-sided argument, like entirely.
I remember thinking that it was really healthy that Kelly wanted to look at her behaviour and find what was funny about it. It's a very healthy aspect of when you're creative. It allows you to examine your own craziness from a kind of safe distance. But it's very difficult not to hear how punishing she is on herself as well. She's a difficult person to be with, that person, because she's projecting all of her fears and anxieties outward. And she's throwing her weight around without really understanding why. She's tantruming. A friend of mine, one of the people who's given notes on this podcast before it's come out, said that she felt that Kel was expressing a lot of pain in this conversation and that I was responding to it quite coldly. I would like to defend that a little bit. This conversation was a work conversation. I understand that it might seem that I'm a bit shut down to what Kel is talking about in terms of her personal struggle. But we did have other conversations where she spoke about her struggles that weren't like this, that weren't me grilling her in this way. What was unusual about this conversation was precisely that this was Kel collating lots of things and putting them in one place and having one conversation about them. It was as if writing the sitcom was the excuse to gather all this stuff together and think about it in one whole connected way. I don't entirely discount the criticism because it's difficult to hear in light of Kel's suicide and not to want to reach out to her. But it wasn't quite as straightforward as that, and we would have spoken about these things in different ways at different times. This was a work session.
I think to contrast with like her messiness, because I do feel this way sometimes when my friends are getting on with their lives. Her friends should all be. They went to school together and now her friends are just sort of getting on with it. Like one of my friends who just moved back from New York, she makes me feel incredibly bad about my life. She is... Or should they already all be in work, or should they still be working?
And does she feel a pressure to perform in front of her friends, like to make out everything's fine? I.e., does one of the friends come round when she's in her pit in the flat?
Never, no. She cuts herself off.
Yeah, but what happens if one of the friends comes round? How does the girl act with the friend? Is she involved in sort of performing with her friends? Is she being honest with her friends?
No, not about everything. She's honest, and but she makes it seem like everything's okay. For example, when she eventually sees her friends, or if somebody does come round, she's honest about the breakup, but she pretends that she's fine. She's over it. She's moving on.
And why can't she confide in her friends?
Because she's embarrassed about what the mess she is.
And why is she embarrassed about that?
Because she wants to be, I don't know, a proper person. Like that's the aim, to be a person who
How is she not a person? Why is she? Because to be a proper person is what? Is to be part of that social norm.
Not necessarily, but I mean, those are just her values, I think. She wants to be the whole thing, and it's very frustrating because she wants to be, have a rewarding career and have, a family and have...
And why does she want that?
Those are her values.
Where do her values come from?
I don't know, I guess it'd be interesting if you do put like a parent in it, if maybe it's the opposite of what her mother is, who is just like this.
Is she from a high achieving family?
Yeah, I reckon I would put her as being from a high achieving family. And I guess
so she's been given every opportunity.
And and this could also be a thing that is in the relationship with her mother. Like her mother is a less extreme version of my mother, but also...
Are the parents funding this time that she's on, and therefore could it seem be about them cutting the funding for it? Is she going to have to face life without those crutches and face it in the real world?
Never. What I want her parents to do is to guilt trip her every time and make her... guilt trip her every time she takes money or every time she needs money.
So they want her to take money and feel bad about it?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's interesting. They want to keep her locked into something.
Yeah.
That's
because of their own whatever, but you don't explore that much. It's more you explore her relationship with her parents, but obviously you don't, because she is the protagonist.
How old is she? Like 21, 22?
I reckon she should be like 25.
25. She's been to college?
Yeah.
She's been to work?
A bit of work.
What kind of work?
And I think she should have dropped out of university as well.
What kind of work?
I guess to contrast even more with her parents and with her friends, it should have been like something that's definitely... I guess if her parents are fairly high achieving, then her kind of work, maybe she was like a secretary or she worked at the front desk of somewhere.
Well, what's the thinking?
It is to contrast even more sharply with her friends.
So she's dropped out of university.
And then she got a job working as a receptionist somewhere.
Why has she dropped out of university?
Because she's depressed. She couldn't finish.
Why haven't all her rich parents and everyone gathered round her and gone, we must stop you being depressed, my dear, and send you to therapists and stuff?
I think she should go to therapy. And
funded by the parents?
Funded by the parents. And also,
But
her parents don't really. Her parents are narcissists, I think, or they should be like some kind of narcissists. And so even though she does go to therapy, it's really difficult for that to stick when you have these. In some way, she is emotionally, I think, dependent on her parents, and she does want their approval. And so if you have that going on the whole time, you know, you go to therapy and you might make some progress. And also, I think she should live away from her parents. I want her to go back home. And so she makes some progress with her life, I guess. And she goes home for, I don't know, a visit or Christmas, a birthday or something. She's just had this massive breakup. She's gone on these shitty dates. I think she should go home to her mother, and her mother should tear her down.
How?
Her mother should tear her down and just say, you know, well, he was too good for you, or you're aiming too high, something along those lines. You're aiming too high.
Why is the mother doing this? Does she have siblings? Does the girl have brothers and sisters?
I think it would be going too far to then have like a brother who's a doctor. Or like a kind of golden child, I guess.
Younger or older?
Younger, because that would be really painful. Okay, actually, here's what I want. Because you know when you have there's always this thing, so I don't know if you like know about, like, I don't know, when you have like narcissistic parents or like abusive parents or whatever, there's like this big thing where there's always like the golden child and the scapegoat.
Yeah,
the scapegoat is the girl.
Yeah.
And I think she should obviously be the scapegoat, that's why she has all these problems.
Yeah.
Her parents would they would give her anything because I think they see it as that's their duty as parents in a way. And I guess if she has a brother or a sister, a married high-achieving sister, you know, the sister's husband is like, you know, he works at a hedge fund or something, and her sister is like, I don't know, a doctor of some kind, and she's the older sister, and her sister's younger than her, and her sister's already married or engaged.
That's all that feels good. All that feels
engaged.
Like
oh my god, her sister should get engaged shortly after her breakup.
Mm-hmm.
And that is miserable because her sister is younger and she's supposed to do it all first. You know what I mean? Supposed to. That's just I don't know. Her sister has like her high school sweetheart.
So everyone's having this perfect life around this girl, and she's withdrawn and become depressed.
Mm.
Was she always like this?
Yeah, because she's always been the scapegoat of the family, I think.
Are the parents still together, I wonder, or have they broken up?
That's what I was thinking. Would they still be together? But I guess if they have like a kind of like interdependent relationship, maybe you can kind of see where she gets her like thing in relationships from. If her mother is. Her dad's just kind of this like really meek guy who still is a bit horrible to her, but not as horrible as a mother. And you can see the mother like, really laying into this man and sort of denigrating him in front of the rest of the family. Maybe that's why she's so demanding of her boyfriend. And the reason that the sister is not in a similar position is because her parents have obviously always praised her because she does meet their exacting standards.
Kel's more sympathetic to her character when she describes the reasons for all of this. Kel makes the link that the character has difficulty in relationships because of how she was treated as a child by her narcissistic parents. The idea that Kelly was the scapegoat and her younger brother was the golden child is exactly what she described about her childhood.
So the story of her life is... I guess she can suffer from like major depressive disorder. Or, wait, maybe there are some like nuances in like major depressive disorder that I wouldn't really understand. It doesn't really have to be like an actual diagnosis that does it, she's just depressed.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, there could be scenes there where she's being diagnosed. That could be another world that she goes into in the story.
Yeah, maybe the father shouldn't be in it. Or maybe, I don't know.
Or maybe there's something interesting about why he isn't.
Okay. I'm just going to call her A. A is a roughly 25-year-old woman who comes from a fairly well-to-do family. They shouldn't be too rich, not like overly rich. Like, I guess upper middle class, but obviously not, a fairly well-to-do black family. Her mother is a narcissist who criticises her heavily and is verbally abusive. maybe some suggestions the mother having been physically abusive in the past. Her mother had her when she was very young and managed to become successful. Therefore, she cannot understand what she considers to be her daughter's self-indulgence.
Right.
A suffers from depression and anxiety. She dropped out of university and
But interestingly, she funds it. She can't understand the daughter's self-indulgence, but she still gives her money to cover her rent when the daughter can't make it. That's how the mother has the interest in keeping the daughter there, because the mother seems to need to shine in comparison to the daughter.
Yeah.
The giving the money is a symbol of her control, whereas her discourse is the opposite. It's about finding ways of...
Yeah, no, it's absolutely about control. She needs to control everything.
And the husband, got out because he couldn't hack it, or he couldn't hack that, or she killed him. There's always a question mark about how Daddy died.
Oh, for God's sake, don't be silly. Maybe she could quit her job because she's depressed.
So she really can't function.
No. She's still sparky. She'll be wittier than I am. She would be like when she's feeling good.
So what happens to make her quit her job? Is that a scene? Did she quit her job after the guys dumped her?
Yeah.
After the guys dumped her, she quits her job.
Okay, so let's say it's so episode 1 I think should be the break up. Her boyfriend can't take any more of her shit. She's just too much. So episode 1 to show a bit of their relationship. They meet up or something. They agree to meet after work. Or he comes over or whatever. They have some back and forth. I would say they're both really intelligent people, clearly really intelligent people. They have some really nice back and forth. They're quite loving and he just cannot get over the sudden switch. I think that James he hates is that I cry for no reason at all, and he's uncomfortable with emotions. So episode 1 would be the breakup. Her boyfriend is a very reasonable and successful guy. He's her dream guy. He breaks up with her because
he's her dream guy. That's interesting. How long has she been with this guy?
Oh, let's say just a couple of years. She manages a couple of years, or no, a year. Let's do a year.
And how has she felt?
Or maybe no, under a year.
Yeah, it might be 6 months.
Yeah, something like that.
So does she know she loves this guy, or is she...
Yeah.
I don't know, where's she at with him? What's her...
She's obsessed.
With him?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. And does she act to him like she's obsessed, or does she pretend she's not?
No, she's open about these things. She's not. She doesn't play games that way.
How is she obsessed then? How do we see her obsession? What does she do?
Before he comes back from work, she fucks everything up herself. Her emotions fuck everything. Before he comes back or comes over for the evening, let's say, or whatever, it doesn't have to be work. Work doesn't have to be involved. But before he comes over for the evening, she spends a long time getting dressed, dolling herself up, cleaning her flat, cooking him a meal, doing all those things. She's excited. I don't know, perhaps she texts a friend that she's excited, or she has a phone call with a friend or something, I don't know, something, whatever.
She really wants that to go well.
She really wants it to go well, she just wants to impress him.
That's interesting. Why does she want to impress him?
Because she loves him and she thinks that he's the most amazing thing, and she wants him to think the same of her. For example, with James, I hadn't seen him for a little while, and he was coming over. He was taking me to lunch. This is just before we went to South Africa, and he was taking me to lunch, but he was just coming over, and he would just come off of a long flight, for example. And so I just wanted to make everything go, just do the really sweet things. Even though we were going to lunch, I got little snacks. I got us breakfasty snacks, because I knew we were going to spend a few hours together. I got him I got us breakfasty booze, so you know I made mimosas, and I thought about everything. I don't want to get him. I don't want to fill him up on bread or something like that because we're going to lunch. Just all of these things, and then obviously you know you put on the perfect underwear and the outfit and everything, and you make sure it's all done up before, so you don't waste any time before lunch, or you don't waste any time during that day. He's just coming in. Does he really need to wait half an hour for you to have a shower and do your hair and everything? You do that all before. Wake up early, do it all before, get dressed, pick out something nice. You think of everything. I think of everything.
Show all of that.
Okay.
That's a whole sequence. That's a whole scene.
Like, let's say that somebody just gets some snacks, or like, you know, like some wine or something. How do you know that there's a level of obsessive detail there?
Because it's the 20th thing you've seen her do. It's the 20th shot of things that she's doing in preparation for this moment when this guy arrives and his shirt's hanging out and he's not quite as, you know, he hasn't prepared for it in the same way.
No, James is not like that. And I don't want the boyfriend to be like that. He needs to be the dream guy. You kind of see why, even though it is a bit obsessive at a certain point, you see why she does go into all that effort, and the loss of it. Do you know what I mean? Everyone around her, I think, needs to be in sharp contrast to her, and just the messiness of her. So this guy, he's somewhat worth the effort. You know, he comes. The fact that you know he comes, she does all this stuff, and he comes in and he's this great guy and he's or seemingly worth that kind of effort, and she just flips. Why does she flip? What is the reason?
Right. Well, this is what we have to find out what.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But I mean, it makes it more shocking as well as like an opening sort of sequence.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And actually, I do remember doing something like that, like when James had to go to Toronto for a meeting or something. So he was away all day when I was in Maine, like from really early in the morning till like, you know, quite late at night. And so yeah, and I cooked him dinner, and I spent a long time, like, I went around with whatever, I can't remember his name, Gian. I don't know what Gian is, like one of the like housekeepers or whatever. And like I made him drive me to like 4 different shops trying to get a wine that James would like. So these are things I have done. And what was the payoff? The payoff was James going, oh, you know, I love a whatever, an X thing, and that was it. And I was like, okay, it was worth it.
There's so many things to say about that conversation, but there are 2 things that strike me in conclusion. Number 1 is the way she keeps pointing out her character's messiness in comparison to other people. I think that speaks to her internal sense of herself. I think it's really significant that she says she's honest with her friends, but she doesn't really let the depth of how unhappy she's feeling. She makes out like she can handle it. And I think that's something that would cause problems for her later on, because even though people knew she was in trouble, many people were still surprised at her death because it seemed like she was handling things. The other thing is that her character's life and problems are an idealized version of her life. The main character is wittier than her. She comes from a more prosperous economic background, and even her mother, who's described as narcissistic and abusive, is, quote, not as bad as my real mother. I think that's partly why it would have been really beneficial for her to continue with this project. Thinking of your life, even though it's pretty tragic and messy, as a comedy, and perhaps toning down the worst of it, allows you to look at it in a safer way. It's a way of dealing with pain. I also think that if we carried on writing it, it would of course have had to open out. Like the character of the boyfriend, for example. He's so perfect, he's not really a character yet. There's no consideration of the problems that character might bring to the situation. But we didn't carry on writing it. Within a few days of this conversation, Kelly got back together with James, and I would imagine that the pressing need to write about the experience was just overtaken by the experience. I'm still struck listening to it by how casually insightful she is. That insightfulness, that ability to call out her own bullshit, that would all develop over the next few months. And that again felt like it was a really healthy development. However, she would also start to vocalize a new element, a weariness with it all, the struggle of life, a feeling that she was fatally marked by her depression and anxiety, and a sense that she could leave life as easily as she could take it. This is a podcast for Kel.